Harris also alluding to returning other Americans like Brittany Griner, who came back to the U.S. from Russia in December 2022. For his part, President Biden spoke with those waiting families flanking him today.
Today, we're bringing home Paul, Evan, Alsu, Vladimir. 3 American citizens and 1 American green card holder. All 4 have been imprisoned unjustly in Russia. All 3 falsely accused of being spies. Now, their brutal ordeal is over, and they're free. But there's nothing that matters more to me than protecting Americans at home and abroad.
The deal includes freeing 7 imprisoned Russian citizens and 5 Germans in exchange for 8 Russians who've been imprisoned basically across 5 different countries. Now, it's important to note among those released Russians are a convicted assassin who was sentenced to life behind bars for basically murder in Germany. As you can see, not all life sentences mean your whole life. There was also a Russian hacker who'd been serving time in the U.S. for stealing millions of dollars from investors. As with all prison swaps, people can debate all the equities. The United States argues this was worth it, and it was vital to bring these people home. It was all the product, as the Times reports, of a complex web of negotiations for months among nations that are otherwise, of course, quote, bitterly at odds over the Russian aggression in Ukraine. You take it all together, and you have news coming out of the Biden-Harris administration that was clearly in the works, as I just mentioned, for a long time. And the individuals, the diplomats, the negotiators, and of course the high-level officials of the government knew this for a long time. There were no leaks about this happening today. There was certainly indications of a process. But it is, by any account, a big breakthrough for the United States, a very significant action coming amidst the ongoing war and unrest in the Ukraine-Russian standoff, and something that, as we expect to hear tonight when the president and the vice president greet these freed Americans and others, something that they will mark as an important breakthrough. It's our top story, and we begin with David Rothkopf, a member of the Council on Foreign Relations, a former senior official in the Clinton administration, a longtime foreign affairs analyst, practitioner, and writer. And as we previewed just moments ago, Ali Velshi from the MSNBC show Velshi, and a MSNBC chief correspondent who's reported on international affairs all over the world, including in dangerous zones and the Russia-Ukraine war and the Middle East. And I have more of some of Ali's relevant reporting on that tonight. So good to see you.
Thank you.
David, as someone who has been inside administrations dealing with all of these kind of matters, how do you rate, how do you give us context on what today's deal means? And what did you think of what we heard there from the president and vice president?
I think it's an exceptionally important deal. It's a great accomplishment in terms of the statecraft involved. It's clear that this has been going on for many months, that many members of the administration have been working at it throughout that period. The vice president, for example, met with the German leader and the Slovenian leader on the edges of the Munich Security Conference in February. The president even had a conversation with the Slovenian leader moments before he announced that he was not running again. You know, in other words, putting this before everything else as a priority. Last week, the CIA director...
David,
I'm sorry, go ahead.
I'm going to let you finish, but you mentioned that rather remarkable tidbit of reporting for American audiences. I'll put up on the screen and you can tell us more about it. But the Journal, among others, reporting today, Biden, an hour before he notified the world he was dropping out, called the Prime Minister of Slovenia, which is contributing, as you mentioned, these Russian spies, to, quote, to secure the pardon necessary for the deal to proceed. A reminder that although we see a lot these days with the cameras on and the internet, you know, you can't turn the internet off, David, much as some might like to. But we don't see everything, that he was juggling the prelude to this big deal in the very hours that he was doing that. Go ahead, David.
No, well, as you know, and as Ali knows, most of diplomacy happens off camera. Most of diplomacy is in the shadows, and the real work of it, the real heavy lifting, takes months and months and is tedious. It's blocking and tackling. It's long negotiations. And this administration, which has, in my view, the best national security team of any administration that I've seen in the 30-plus years I've been in D.C., have worked this deal like they have so many others, and they've gotten a good result. Needless to say, Putin got something of what he wanted.
Sure.
Putin got some people back that he wanted. But I'll tell you something, from the point of view of the United States, we got back journalists, we got back a businessman, we've got back a man who's been an important dissident voice. They got back killers and a hacker.
Yep.
So what's a better deal? Who ends up at the better end of this deal? I think we do.
Ali Velshi, you've been covering this story for a long time, including on our air today, so people who've had the news on have seen you. I wanted to make sure we played your interview with one of these individuals, Kara Mirza. This was just about a day before he was then detained in Russia. Let's take a look.
Are you worried about speaking out against the Russian government and against this war and invasion from Russia?
The dangers, we all know the price of being in opposition to Vladimir Putin's regime. Just about an hour ago, I went to the bridge next to the Kremlin where my friend and colleague, Russian opposition leader Boris Nemtsov, was murdered, gunned down in February of 2015. And there's no doubt that Vladimir Putin ordered that assassination. This is the price of freedom. This is the price of opposing the Putin regime in Russia.
Ali?
This is the price of freedom. Now, you see that interview. That was April 10th of 2022. The next day, he was arrested because he said something to me on that show, and he said something to CNN that day that violated Russian policy. He went back knowing he was going to be arrested. Bill Browder was with him at dinner 2 nights before, begged him not to go back. He said, I've got to go back. So he went back. See the picture of him coming out today, getting off that plane. He's gaunt. He's ill. He's not coming back to Joint Base Andrews tonight. He's getting off in Germany. I hope they're taking him right to a hospital. But this is a guy. This is interesting because David makes a point. We got a businessman. Whelan's been in there for more than 2,000 days. Evan Gershkovich, there was always hope he was going to come back because it was clearly ridiculous what they had charged him with. It's a mystery that Vladimir Kara-Murza has been released. He's a dissident. He's an opposition leader. So that's all of these were a little bit different. As you know, when you're arrested in Russia and you're prosecuted, the prosecution rate is in the high 90%. You're going to go to jail. So we knew there wasn't going to be a deal until Evan Gershkovich was convicted. The other problem, you talk about that Munich Security Conference, Vice President Harris had a meeting with the German chancellor on the sidelines of that. That was also when we found out that Alexei Navalny was dead. He was supposed to be one of the people released. So that threw a wrench into the works and delayed things, but they got it back on track and completed this negotiation. It's a very big deal.
What do you see in Putin's mind here today?
I think David got it exactly right. He gets to tell the Russian people he got these patriotic Russians back. They are actually convicted of things that they did in other parts of the world. The Americans who were convicted in Russia, it's very dubious when you look at the Russian legal system as to what a prosecution actually is there. The Russians insist that these 3 Americans were, these 4 Americans, really 3 Americans and Vladimir, who's a permanent resident, were convicted of actual crimes. But the crime Vladimir was convicted of, for instance, was speaking against the war. The crime Evan Gershkovich was convicted is the same as Jason Rezaian of the Washington Post in Iran. Of spying. They like that. They go through journalists' phones and they say, wow, you've got State Department officials in here and you've got sources because our phones are filled with the same people that spies would have. So it's nonsensical. I think Vladimir Putin thinks he got the better side of the deal, but I'm with David. I think America got the better side of the deal here.
And David, the president of the United States was asked today about the former president's claims, Donald Trump, that he would somehow do what Biden has now done. Take a listen.
President Trump has said repeatedly that he could have gotten the hostages out without giving anything in exchange. What do you say to that? What do you say to President Trump now, former president?
Why didn't he do it when he's president?
David?
Exactly right. Paul Whelan was in there. He could have achieved a great deal, achieved a great breakthrough. In fact, he didn't do that. And he said something very unconstructive about this a couple of months ago when he said, I'll get them out after I get elected. Clearly, there's a calculus going on here in Putin's mind. And I think had Putin thought that Donald Trump was going to win, he would have waited because he knew he would get a better deal with his friend Donald Trump. I think Putin is looking at what's going on in American politics right now, and he says, Trump's chances are fading, and with that, my leverage is fading. So it's actually the opposite of what Trump said.
Really striking. And any thoughts on the vice president today, David?
Well, I think the vice president was in the middle of this, just as she's been in the middle of national security and foreign policy throughout the past 3.5 years, just as she was In the middle of it, she was on the Senate Intelligence Committee. She's extremely accomplished in these areas. She has played an active role here, in Ukraine, in Gaza, in helping to contain China around the world and dealing with issues like AI and next generation threats. And this is just one other example of why, in my estimation, the vice president is not an accidental candidate. The vice president is the best qualified person in America to be the next president of the United States.
David Rothkopf, a foreign policy veteran, I want to thank you. Ali Velshi is going to stay with me for a minute. I always like to be as transparent as I can with the viewers. I've tried to get you in here to do a fallback and talk about your book for a minute. There's been a lot of news. You've been really busy.
Yes.
We've been a little busy.
Yes.
So now I got you on foreign policy, but I said, let's take a minute, okay? And we're still going to do this.
Thank you.
This has been in the works. The book
Yes.
is Small Acts of Courage. It looks at migration across the continents, your family history here, the themes of diversity and immigration, which are back in presidential politics. Do we embrace this? Is that the American creed, or do we have people fighting against it? You write at one point about your father. What I didn't understand living in the affluence of the West was my father's discipline is what it allowed him to move, survive, and thrive in so many cultures. He moved from South Africa to Kenya to Canada. In his world, as opposed to mine, you couldn't make it if you weren't disciplined, and discipline is not something one comes by naturally. Sure, I mean, we'd rather eat and sleep and do nothing. It's a trait, a skill that has to be learned. A few words from Ali Velshi. I hope people go out and find the book if they're interested, Small Acts of Courage.
Thank you.
Tell us about not only what's in the book, but how it felt pulling back from what we know and we showed as your busy international schedule to reflect.
Yeah, to reflect, because you sometimes start to think, why am I who I am? How did I get to where I am? And it's a fun story because it wasn't intended to coincide with what's going on today. But I'm a child. I was born in Kenya. I grew up in Canada. I've moved here. My parents were born in South Africa. They were exiles because of apartheid. We're all Indian, of Indian extraction, although many of the Muslims in India went to Pakistan, but I'm not Pakistani. So this concept of holding different identities is something I grew up with, and it's cool. We don't struggle. We don't get up in the morning and wonder which one am I today. Once in a while, when American politics gets a little hot, I lean into being Canadian. But fundamentally, but the other message of the book, which I think is the more important one, is that in this time where the world feels overwhelming and too much and too hard, my point there is that my lesson from my family is do the thing in front of you. Do the thing that you can fix. Do the thing that you can have some impact on that the world may never know. But someone will have watched you, or you'll have paved the road for someone to do more. My grandfather died at the age of 58 years old. He was Gandhi's youngest student on his ashram. He fought apartheid all his life. He died thinking he had failed. Didn't know his son, my father, would become a member of Parliament in Canada. He didn't know his grandson would be here on your show tonight talking about this. So did he fail? Or did he plant the seed of a tree we're enjoying the fruits of today?
I love that. It's hard to judge a story if it's not over. And if you have a family tree, hopefully the story is almost never over.
I love that.
Really great to have you here on More Than One Thing.
We really have been working on this.
We wanted to do that.
The first week of May.
Literally, Small Acts of Courage.
Appreciate your tenacity.
There you go. I had to learn it. Small Acts of Courage by our friend Ali Velshi. Full disclosure, he's a friend and colleague. Get it wherever books are sold.
Thanks,
Coming up, Illinois Governor J.B. Pritzker, my live guest tonight in the Veep Stakes and everything else, so that's going to be interesting. And Harris taking this step towards becoming the official nominee today. We're going to explain the new early voting procedure for delegates with signs that Trump is very worried